Hey guys, thanks again for checking out yet another one of my battle reports. Thank you as always. So if you checked out the spoilers for this game, I did touch on the fact that a lot of my games, uh, pretty much in general, are pretty one-sided. I think there's several reasons for this, like I touched on, so if you want to get those reasons, you can go back and check the spoilers section in the actual battle report. But basically, I think it comes down to the fact that one of the things is 8th edition is still very young. People are still filling out a lot of lists. Whether you like it or not, list strength is a very important thing in Warhammer. You really just can't win a game if you don't have the tools to do so. Like if your list is significantly weaker than your opponent's, it's going to be almost impossible for you to actually win the game. I mean, there's always dice involved and stuff like that, but if you just don't have the tools in the toolbox, it's not really going to happen. People are also still learning like the rules and things, the small little, intricacies of what you can do, especially in combat, that really lead to big advantages, like you could see in this game with me constantly being able to engage Pask over and over again, so that he actually didn't do anything the entire game except for Overwatch one time, in which he didn't kill anything. So he was literally completely useless the entire time, and was about a sixth of my opponent's army. So that was pretty bad. People are also either coming back to the game or joining the game. I've been playing miniatures for a really long time, like well over a decade. Not the entire time in that spans, but I've been playing like strategy games and keeping up with miniatures and stuff like that, even when I wasn't actively playing them. So I have a lot of experience, not only with like list building, just kind of knowing what works, what flows as far as the list goes, but generally how to like position models, things like that. I mean, I of course make mistakes, and I'm not saying I'm the best player by any stretch of the imagination. I just think I have a big leg up on a lot of people that are playing 8th edition right now, and that probably makes my games look a lot more one-sided than they would ordinarily be. So in that vein, I don't think there's a lot to talk about on my side of the table, so I'm going to be focusing on my opponent's side of the table a lot more in these kind of more one-sided games. I consider them learning games. We're not playing for like money or prestige or anything like that. It's just a casual game for a league or to have some fun. So those are the games that I kind of try to really, learn from and use them for that kind of thing, as well as obviously personal enjoyment. Just to touch very quickly on my side of the table, I did make some intentional mistakes this game just to try to even things out a little bit. Like I said, it was a casual game. I'm not interested in like really stomping anybody in a casual environment. If it comes to a tournament or something, I'll play no holds barred. But in this game, I just didn't, I didn't see a reason to just crush my opponent. I don't really see what that does for either of us. So I took some casualties in a way that like would open some things up. I intentionally didn't say some things when there was like some pile-ins that weren't legal, stuff like that. So you could say that I probably should have mentioned those things, because some of them can develop bad habits in other players, but I mean it was just a personal call at the time, so I kind of let it slide. As far as mistakes, I didn't really make any big ones. The biggest problem I had was probably getting my special character War Boss into combat. He was kind of in the back most of the time, but that's sort of what he does a lot of the time anyways. He would have probably liked to get into the Marines this game, but that just didn't happen. I mean, I was kind of gonna try to use him to like go hunt Pask or something like that, but that didn't end up needing to be done. Once that kind of the game was going, I was like, oh, I don't really have anything to do with this guy, because what I thought I was gonna need him for, I didn't turn out to need him for. And then the game ended very quickly, so I didn't really have too much time to like reposition him or anything. I should have probably made a little bit of a gap for him to like advance through my lines, and then get up and get into the game a little bit more. But like I said, I wasn't really playing super cutthroat or anything like that, so some of those things you have to kind of take with a grain of salt. Moving over to Simon's side of the board, so we'll start right from the get-go here. This is something I used to see a lot when I played Warhammer Fantasy. If you never played that game, that was a game where deployment was probably the most important part of the game. maneuverability was very low in Warhammer Fantasy. So the matchups you would set when the game started, and by matchups I mean what's across from your units. That's the most likely thing they're going to fight, unless they have like some kind of guns or bows or something like that. The matchups that you dictate were very important, so deployment was very important. You couldn't really just be like, oh, I have this unit across from this unit that my opponent has. That's not a good match for me. I'm just going to swing him all the way to the other side of the board. Things just couldn't do that. Like even things that were fast and had flying and stuff like that, they couldn't redeploy that quickly. So deployment ended up being a really big part of the game. If you go back and look at the pictures for this game, there were some pretty big mistakes from the Imperium side when it comes to deployment. First of all, Pask is in the center of the board and way too far up. Against an assault army, my number one goal is going to be to engage him and make him do nothing, and that's exactly what I did this entire game, and it was way too easy to do that. He needed to be back, he needed to be like bubble wrapped or screened or something like that, so I couldn't get to him so easily, and that way he can just sit back and shoot. Now his guns aren't particularly amazing against my army, but they hit on twos and they have a decent volume of shots, so I mean it's better than doing nothing with them. So as soon as I saw that, I was like, okay, I can probably take Pask out of the game by at least turn 2, even if I fail my deep strike charge. But on turn 1, if I get my deep strike charge off, so that's not super great. There was also no deep strike defense in my opponent's deployment. Now, I'm not sure if he was really thinking about that. I did explain what the jump does because I don't think he played against Orks before, so he was at least somewhat aware of it, but there was no either like castling up or using like one unit to kind of protect the others, things like that, and I was able to charge multiple units in the early game, which is just something that Guard can't afford, both because Guard units are very fragile, and then even if they survive, you have to spend orders enabling them to shoot when they fall back instead of using orders to like reroll hits, reroll wounds, get extra lasgun shots, stuff like that. It's way more important for your offense than just being able to fall back and shoot again. Being able to fall back and shoot again is like a last resort kind of thing, or something that you do with like really big conscript units. It's not something you're supposed to rely on. So that I was able to force a lot of that in the game as well, just because of the deployment from my opponent. Also, I think that using the Marines as kind of their own little self-contained thing isn't such a good idea. I would have preferred to see that the infantry squads were kind of the front line. They were really cheap units. All they had was a Voxcaster, so they're very throwaway. And then they could have just screened the army, and then the Primaris Marines could have been like the second wave, because they have medium range guns. They're decent in combat because they're Marines. They have pretty good survivability because they're Marines with 2 wounds, stuff like that. And then the veterans could have been the final like rank, because they have a lot of special weapons, a lot of heavy weapons, and they kind of just want to stay in the back and do the shooting. And that's more where like Creed and Pask should have been as well. So you could have either deployed that in like a line or in kind of like a like half circle, like crescent shape, and that way I would have had to eat through the less important parts of the Imperial army before I was able to get into the parts that I wanted. Now, if you look at the deployment, it did kind of go like that. Like the infantry squads are definitely up front, the veteran squads are more on the back and hiding in the ruins to take advantage of like elevation, cover, stuff like that. But there's just some holes in there that I was able to exploit, and I think those could have been shored up a little bit. And then the Marines are kind of just out on their own, not doing anything, not having any support, not supporting anybody else. It was like they're their own little faction of the army that doesn't work with the guardsmen or anything like that, and that's not really how it should be played. So once I saw deployment kind of developing like that, it signaled to me that there were not only very exploitable holes in my opponent's deployment, but that he probably wasn't as experienced with like positioning models and doing the little things like that, and that can be like a key just on your opponent's experience level and what you can kind of get away with as far as like setting up for traps and things like that. So going on to turn 1, I was very fortunate to get turn 1. I wouldn't have eaten that much shooting if I didn't go first, but the second turn shooting would have been pretty bad. So and even a little bit of extra shooting can be kind of a pain. So that was good for me. I got to do my advances and all that kind of stuff. I didn't get particularly far up the board. Like my units didn't run that far. I didn't blow any command points to roll that or anything like that. But it just kind of let me set the pace of the game. You know, I was taking ground very aggressively. The Maelstrom objectives are really good for Orks, as I've said multiple times. They're very good at holding objectives, they're good at destroying units, they're good at denying your opponent from holding objectives and destroying units, because at least the way I play Orks, big boys units that have defensive auras are really hard to remove in one go. And then even if you do, it's kind of not the best idea, as I've also talked about before. You generally want to destroy Orks in like layers, kind of peel them like an onion, I guess, instead of just like tunnel visioning one unit down at a time. That almost never works out from what I've seen. Like maybe if you have a really like crazy army in terms of firepower, but I mean that would have to be like a pretty insane list to do that. So and then I could tell that there wasn't enough. Like, so initially I thought there was enough firepower in the list to really dent my army, but then as I was kind of playing it and I saw how models were being positioned and stuff like that, I realized that there probably wasn't going to be. There wasn't going to be, Simon wasn't taking enough advantage of like rapid fire range. He wasn't gaining enough mileage out of things like first rank fire, second rank fire, stuff like that, to really do much to me. So he had the one big turn of shooting on on his turn one, but I was already in his lines by that point. I'd already killed units. He was already kind of like scrambling to get me or to keep me out, and then from there it's just kind of like, you know, you're trying to stop too many leaks and it's not going to happen. So yeah, on turn one, I didn't particularly like the Space Marines just advancing up. They shoot just fine, they should have been doing that, but again, if they had an infantry squad in front of them to at least screen or something, that prevents me from being able to advance because I have to like shoot the screen away, or I just have to charge the screen, in which case if the Marines are properly positioned, they're going to get another turn of shooting on me, which is, you know, every little bit matters at that point. But as it was, they were just like, hey, here we are, and I was just able to charge them. And I mean, I don't think Primaris Marines are any good, personally. They are just Marines that have 2 wounds and like a better gun, but their gun still is pretty crappy. So it's like they're just gonna die like Marines, and they did. Like they didn't do anything else. They didn't do anything the Marines wouldn't have done. In fact, a tactical squad would have been so much better because it would have had like special weapons. It would have had more bolters, stuff like that. But as I explained in the battle report, they're kind of just in there to fill up points because he's still building his list. So that's completely excusable. I'll talk about the list a little bit when I'm through with the game, but yeah, they were just kind of thrown out there into the wind, and I was just like, okay, I guess I'll take all of these units for pretty much for free. I mean, I wouldn't have even lost the war boss if I hadn't intentionally removed the casualty to let the captain charge him, because I knew that the captain was going to be able to kill the war boss pretty easily. Like, he has a very accurate and high amount of attacks power fist, which is very good against my war boss. But so I mean, I could have just, you know, kept the captain pinned with the red boys pretty much forever, use the war boss to eat through the Primaris, and then, you know, eventually just take in the captain like I did while moving the weird boys over for like smite support and stuff like that, while I was just walking through the rest of the Imperial Guard. Imperial Guard are great screens. Infantry squads are great screens. Conscripts are probably the second best screen unit in the game behind Brimstone Horrors. So having a lot of access to them but not using them for that purpose was a big error in my opinion. So if you're playing any kind of like Imperial soup army, like mixed Imperium, or even just most regular faction armies, you know, use your cheap units as screens, as throwaway units, stuff like that. That's what they're there for. I mean, the infantry squads were kitted out perfectly for that, other than having like the Voxcaster. The Voxcaster should probably be like a flamer or something. And they just didn't do that. They were just they just hung out and didn't do anything. Um, some other problems were Imperium should not, so I should rephrase that. So this list should not have been ever charging me. It's not going to do enough damage with anything. It'll be better off just standing there and shooting and then getting Overwatch. In most situations, like the Marines are debatable, but the guard should never be charging. It's like the turn he charged with the Lord Commissar and the infantry squad. I was just like, you're just giving me this unit for free. I mean, it's not going to do anything. Statistically, it kills like a couple orcs, and then I'm just going to destroy them. So it's like that's just another screen unit getting thrown away for nothing. It doesn't cost me any time to like go after them. It doesn't cost me any like offense that I was going to put anywhere else. I mean, I was I didn't have anything else to swing at with those models, so it was just like giving me stuff to swing at. I was still in combat with a little bit of an infantry squad, but he just gave me another one and a character to eat through. I mean, and then it didn't even end up like keeping Pask safe or anything like that. I mean, he could have just moved them in front of Pask to screen him, shot shot something, and then lost the unit, but delayed me another turn or something like that. So that's something that's happened to me quite a few times when I've been playing people. They just it happens more so with like melee units where they'll just charge because it's a melee unit. It's supposed to charge stuff, right? But not all melee units are created equal. I mean, orcs are really high-end melee units. Like, to be honest, they're extremely cheap for the stat line that they bring. So you can't just throw stuff into them. Even like pretty melee-centric units like witches, for example, they don't do anything to orcs of use. So like you have to find other ways to get value out of them other than just mindlessly throwing them into a big unit of orcs. Like, they're not going to get their points back. They're just going to die, and then your opponent's just going to get farther and farther ahead on attrition. So I think being able to like maximize those kind of units, especially the assault type units, in games where they don't have a clear job, is extremely good. Extremely a mark of an extremely good player. It doesn't always feel good to do that, like to use witches or I can't think of another example off the top of my head, like Howling Banshees, something like that, as just like a screen. But sometimes that's what you gotta do to get the win. If you're playing to win, at least. So yeah, that's just something else to think about. Those were probably the biggest portions of the game. It was, like I said, really bad deployment, and then I think just being a little unfamiliar with like how screening units are supposed to work, and moving the army to kind of like make your opponent take it in layers while you're getting as much shooting as possible. That's how guard works. That's how all guard lists work, is you have like the weak outer layers, and then as you get like more and more inside, there's the more and more valuable shooting units, and so you're buying time for those units to do their work, and that's how you get your wins, especially against combat armies. Against shooting armies, it's a little different sometimes, but in this case, I was playing definitely a combat army. I have barely any guns, so those two issues made the game snowball out of control extremely quickly. Like, some things definitely went my way. If I hadn't made that charge on turn one, the game would have been certainly different. Like, obviously, Pass would have gotten to shoot. I probably would have lost most of that unit that jumped in, but then I would have just followed up again next turn. I would have jumped another unit in, because I can just keep hurling units at my opponent with the Weird Boy, which is really strong. So I don't think the game would have changed much. It would have just kind of delayed that outcome. The game was mostly decided by the fact that my opponent wasn't correctly like leveraging his options. I think if we were to play again with the same list and the same mission, even like using the same turn order and stuff like that, he could do a lot better if he just like played more centrally, was spaced properly, had his screen units where they should be, stuff like that, because I would have came in, had to eat through like 2 ranks of infantry squads probably, maybe like only one with some shooting depending on how that went, and then get into those Space Marine units, and then the veterans would just keep blasting away at me, maybe like picking off some characters or something depending on placement. definitely like using orders from Creed really well, stuff like that. So I think the army could play a lot more to its strengths like that. Now, that being said, on the scenario side of the game, the guard list couldn't do anything. Like in the mission, you have to get. We were playing the relics, so you have to get to the middle of the table. He's never gonna be able to do that. There's no unless he like is tabling me. There's no way he can get through my army to get to the middle of the table. Like I'm the aggressive player. I'm going to his side of the table. I'm gonna keep pushing into his deployment zone. I'm never gonna stop unless all my stuff's dead, and then he's probably just gonna win anyways. So he doesn't have any like deep strike or like transports or anything like that he can kind of like skirt around my lines with. He has all foot guys and one tank that doesn't even want to be moving around that much. It wants to just be staying still and shooting. He also has problems holding objectives. So there's objectives in your deployment zone which are easy to hold initially, but then as combats start going on and you start losing units, they become harder and harder to hold. Same with like he can never get models into my side of the table edge. Like that one's not even available to him if he rolls it. It's just like it's basically treated as a result that doesn't exist. Holding his own deployment zone is very difficult, especially in Hammer and Anvil because your deployment zone's so big. So like a lot of these things punish really static gun lines, and that's why I like the ITC missions so much, because this is a personal opinion, but I don't think static gun lines should be good. I think they're really boring to play with and play against. Like I've played plenty of static gun line armies in my lifetime, and they're always just horribly boring, even if they're good. So it kind of encourages you to have like a bit more of a shoot and scoot army, like a mechanized army, or like if you have a gun line, you also have some like some deep strike units, stuff like that, just like something to add some depth and some variety to it, and that didn't really exist in this list. I don't think this list was built for ITC missions or anything like that, but it's just something to bear in mind going forward, especially if you're interested in tournaments and stuff, because a lot of people are probably going to be using those missions or missions like them, which I think they should because they're really good. So yeah, that's pretty much the long and the short of the game. If you want to take anything away from this game, I would say pay really close attention to your deployments. That's a really good place to start improving on your game as you're playing. If you kind of follow my games with my orcs, I came up with like a pretty consistent plan for my deployment. It doesn't work every game, but it gives me like a blueprint to start with when I'm playing every time, so I'm not like just wondering what the hell I'm gonna do. You know, I have my formation of like I have my characters that go on either flank. I have my units that I know I can cover with my auras and things like that to get all my buffs. I have a unit that stays in the back, which keeps them out of the way from my advanced units, and I kind of deep strike them forward, which is very guaranteed with my build. These are all things that I figured out as I was playing, and now I have like a very loose, well, not a loose, but a good plan going into any game that I can then kind of pull pieces out of and change if I need to, instead of just coming up with a whole new plan every time I play, which is like a really big pain in the ass. So yeah, like try to think about how your list plays. Like, what does it want to do? What is it not good at? How can you use deployment to achieve those goals and kind of shore up your weaknesses? And then just work on your model placement, especially if you're a shooting army. Like model placement for a shooting army is so important. People think it's like a melee army thing. No, shooting armies get punished very hard by even a few models being out of position. If you ever like accidentally let your opponent consolidate into a unit, that's horrible. Even if you're playing an army that can fall back and still shoot. You know, if you have like exposed flanks or anything like that, your opponent can get around and like get into your really valuable units or start tying up your armor or anything like that. It's really bad. You have to be very cognizant of like the terrain, the board, the deployment type, what your opponent can do as far as maneuverability and speed. Like, do they have fly, stuff like that. These are all things you have to know if you're playing a shooting army that don't honestly always matter that much when you're playing a combat army. Like as someone who plays orcs, like a lot of combat armies are just kind of go forward and smash. They're not always that simple, but they kind of always have that game plan to rely on. And you could say gun lines always have the just shoot everything and you'll win game plan. But as you start even getting towards like the medium tiers of play, it just doesn't work anymore. People know how to counter that because it happens so often. It's so prevalent in the game, especially in 40K. 40K is such a heavy shooting game that people learn very quickly how to counter big time shooting armies, unless they're like truly overpowered or something, which does happen. So yeah, those would be the takeaways from the game. That's certainly the things I noticed about the game, both while playing it and while doing the battle report. So those are my takeaways as well. I'm gonna try to get another game in this week. I've had some personal stuff going on that is making getting to the stores a little bit more difficult than it would ordinarily be, but I'd like to play another 2,000 point game with my Tau, just because I'm really trying to put them through their paces and get a feel for that list. I think I'm not playing it nearly up to the potential that it could be, and I really want to be, because there's some tournaments coming up and stuff like that, and I would like to do well at them, even if people consider Tau commander spam to be overpowered and or boring. I don't agree. I mean, it's not overpowered, it's very strong, but I don't think it's boring. So yeah, look for that, and as always, thanks for checking out my video.